Well, thank you everyone for coming out tonight to welcome Professor Antanas Mockus to the Gallatin School, to NYU, to the Urban Democracy Lab. Professor Mockus has many items on his curriculum. He holds doctorates, he's a philosopher, he's a mathematician, he's a public figure, he's an innovator, he's a secret sociologist, I suspect. But the thing I would like to introduce him as, the challenge of Antanas Mockus. I had the opportunity to hear of him for the first time when, as mayor of Bogota, our worlds briefly intersected when he started to introduce participatory budgeting. And again, I continue to hear exciting things coming from Bogota. The city has made major fiscal improvements. He will certainly talk about some of his important achievements, including the reduction of violence. And while many people will tell you that Mockus transformed Bogota, if you ask Mockus or you read his writings, he doesn't say that. He set policies in motion, but it was the people of Bogota who transformed their own city. This is a subtle but very, very important distinction, and that's what's at the heart of his thinking, of his practice, of his public speaking, and of the challenge that he represents. I find myself always challenged by when I hear him. I'm always challenged when I read his writings, and he pushes us to think just a little bit beyond. So, in that spirit, please help me welcome Professor Antanas Mockus.
Thank you. I am an admirer of Groucho Marx. I do not eat as well as he does, but I want to walk a little bit. So thank you for being so much here. And let's show some actions and some ideas. The ideas try to explain what happened in the actions, and the actions try to prepare what is the ideology or the philosophy of our work. I will try to do this. No, it's in that direction. Okay, so summarizing, I would like to have played a lot in my life, and also I would like to have governed a lot. And appearing sometimes the most serious things I did as if I was playing. In some sense it seems a call to non-responsibility. So the first time I was elected, for the first year, I remember a lot of people seriously, sincerely furious, saying this man is playing with mimes and the city has a lot of problems. Well, that's true, the city had a lot of problems. Well, I would like to underline the enormous value of attention. In 21st century, we all will give each other some kind of attention, so attention is a miracle. This gathering of people to hear someone is sort of orgy. Well, sorry if I make some comparisons with a space of life that is not used to speak about. My wife says to me, don't forget not speak about your sexuality. No, sorry. I miss it. Okay, so Adriana, I will try to do my best. Okay, this is Bogota in 1995, 5,700,000, and it continues to grow and to grow strongly. So one of the everyday problems is how to solve new services, and the management of public services is one of my proudest motives. It's a lot, perhaps more important thing than what I made for being visible. But being visible helped me to change things in public services. For example, we could sell half of the company of electricity. And a lot of developments of physical Bogota were made possible with this money. We have a city in bankruptcy, a lot of disorder in administration, socially accepted corruption, what we call low sense of belonging, and pessimism. People were thinking that Bogota had no remedy. Crimes against life and property were roaring. Shortcut culture was generalized. What I call shortcut culture is when people look for results at any price and ignore consequences, especially future long-term consequences, or geographically and sociologically people that are different from you, are in a distance. When I changed it, the day where cars could not, for certain numbers, could not circulate, I was more sensitive to the university faculty reaction than to the reaction of the woman or man that prepare things for Friday or Saturday night. So there is a bias, sociological bias. We govern a city thinking that the city is conformed of a lot of small antennas, and well, we try to tolerate each other. Well, almost half of the city council had been in a jail. When I came to the mayor city, they were out of jail. But all the people remembered the police coming with guns, absolutely exaggerated, the attorneys, police irrumping in the offices of the city councilors. And so for me it was easy saying I will not govern, I will not co-govern with the men of the council, with the councilors. Co-gobierno was like naming the daemon. Yeah. But well, it was usual that people in politics give money to different NGOs or to different groups with total liberty. And we had a constitutional reform that forbidden to do that. And the former mayor that was after that in jail ignored that the constitutional ban is active from the first day. He waited a new law to develop the ban. Okay, and the most important thing, bored citizens were ready to bet on a playful change. So things were so bad that they could not get more bad a lot. Well, at a certain moment I was menaced. I don't know if you know that the bulletproof jackets are very easy to cut with scissors or with knives. Because when it's a fire gun, it turns very quickly. So it gets trapped in the tissue. But if you take a scissor, you can do this, you can do that. So it was horrible to have to wear a bulletproof jacket. I had promised it to the arts faculty of National University that if I had to use a bulletproof jacket, I will sell it and give the money for education ministry. But finally, in that moment, I did not know that it's forbidden to sell us in the free market. There is no free market of anti-bulletproof jackets. I still do not understand very well why, but it's so. Well, I also, but that was not an idea, but I cooperated with someone that had the idea. I dressed myself as super civico. But the important thing that this was, once people's attention is captured, I could say each one of you can be a super civico or a super civic woman. Each one of us has to defend the city. And I was a little bit aggressive, taking out of the walls a lot of papers, and well, that was 10 minutes work. That night, national press wanted to have me dressed in this way. Um, well, it's not chastity. Well, I don't know how to. Well, it was close to limits, to some limits. And the next morning, it was the international press. And I was close to a church, like searching to be protected. And there were a lot of photos. And one woman was passing by and said, "Mayor, Mr. Mayor, please work." I had exaggerated the photos as super citizens. Okay. At a certain moment, we had a defense ministry that was with that had been dean of the Jesuit university, and we were completely agreeing in ideological terms about guns in the hands of citizens. He was against. We obviously were also against guns in the arms in the hands of civics. Sorry, when I was young, I was tartamudeando, ta 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 ta. And then about 10 years ago, I read that it was an intelligence manifestation. Well, that's a consuelo. Well, we wanted the ministry to ban all the guns. We had banned it with the cooperation of military on weekends. So during the week, people were with guns, and during the weekend, the people were without guns. And we had the dream of not having guns in all the week. And the minister, badly informed about the president's declaration, said the wood is not ready for making spoons. Then we had to make spoons from guns, but we could not use legal instruments for ban the guns, so we asked people to voluntarily give up their guns. And this was incredible. I had to sleep between the morning and the afternoon. I was very nervous because we didn't know how much guns we will collect. On that date, one of my sister's son, one young boy, was using a water gun, and I didn't correct him. I saw him and said, "It's a water gun." 3 hours later, he was calling me, "Antanas, I'm sorry, I'm very sorry. I throw the gun of the water gun in plastic, and I put out one of the teeth." So consistency is very important. This was slowly constructed motto. It's on the cemetery. Susan Sontag was traveling in Bogota. She didn't know that was made by us. She stopped the car and she took a photo. And some weeks later, I met her here in New York, and she was saying to me, I think it was an exaggeration, but she said, "I have it in my computer as saving, as the thing that appears for as the back." Well, this is in the cemetery. At a certain moment, 500 less murder victims in a week was no new. All the journalists were saying, "You reduced it once again." So we had to show people what were 500 youngsters that were protected. And they were sitting, and at a certain moment there was a chorus singing. La 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 ram tam 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 tam. And at that moment, on the convenient, they seated in each one in his place, like you can see there. That's the closer that I have been to a sort of mimicry of resurrection. What is true? What is true is that when a human being dies, there is no way back. It's total irreversibility, at least with human instruments. That's a strange comparison. Please don't kill each other, but especially do not kill children. Well, the carrot law is another story. When we analyzed statistics, it was amazing. Friday night and Saturday night, there were 60–70% more murders than during the week. And in more than half of the victims of murders, they had taken alcohol. So I don't know if organized crime goes with bottles of alcohol given to their victims 3 or 4 hours before killing. I think that it's most intolerance. And people, to be macho is not easy. To be macho is to have a lot of duties, of obligations. One of them is behaving absurdly violently when from the other table someone invites a woman that is at your table. It's horrible. You see all the other machos looking to you and what you are going to do now. Okay. So we invented the carrot law. To be carrot in Colombia is to be self-regulated, to be, it's not as important as Protestant reform, but it's a sort of little reform applied in Colombia. It's to be carrot is not get involved in fights, not drinking too much, etc. It was a little bit despective. So my first work was saying, we can't be scenarios. We should be carrots. Well, and yes, we progressed. Some people were claiming why, because the restriction on alcohol selling was 1 o'clock in the morning. So I was saying to young people, let's begin sooner. Well, I have a reputation of not drinking. It's horrible. When I go to a party, normally the musicians see that I drink. Well, not too much, but I drink normally. But people see things in an exaggerated contrast. Well, one of the main problems was that the reputation of zanahorios were that they were boring. So we tried to find people that did not need alcohol for being funny, for being happy, for smiling, for making other people smile. This is an anti-carrot poster. This is not for, but it's very important, even if it is against. And one of the main ideas is the more against is this expression, if this expression communicates, you engage in a discussion. You have people saying, I am with the carrot law, and other people say, no, I am against. That is the most important form of participation by far in politics is taking public debate seriously. And the existence of different points of view is very useful. It's a marvel. At the beginning, you want having people, we'll do what you want. No, it's better protest. Well, I will tell later. That's one of the biggest pleasures is when your proposal of language reform is taken by the people. When the people begin to make like that. We had a citizens card like that, 15 hours discussing the capitalization of the electrical company, and the union members were doing like that. Not applauding, not shouting, just using the common language. So to govern is to share a language. Well, the first time I have a very big pleasure destroying guns. It's my biggest public vice. And the first time I did it without permission of the military. So the military came with a very clear argument: by our constitution, only militaries can destroy guns. And I apologize because in that moment I was not so imaginative to say, let's organize an international congress of military interested in destroying guns. And with some governments that would sympathize, it would be a beautiful thing to have militaries saying, we are the only we are the only legally authorized to destroy guns. And by the pressure of mayors and organized people, having also the idea that the military are the people that could destroy with maximum legitimacy guns. If they, the professionals of gun use, give up their guns, bocato di cardinal. This is the pleasure. Well, this is Padre Lirio, and this is member of police. That was with authorization. Another thing that we put up was a vaccine against domestic violence. It was horrible because I didn't want drops of water. But the people that were in the team convinced me that for youngsters it was very important to receive water. So this was the vaccine, and this was my vaccine. Because I'm also violent, I have been violent. My first shirt for making politics was never used except in the house of my mother and my sister. And it was, I renounce to my violence to be citizen, signed Antanas Mockus. So instead of asking people, don't be violent, say, help me to be non-violent myself. I had a lot of chance by having Peñalosa as my successor and my predecessor. It was 2 terms in mayor, and between the 2 terms, it was Peñalosa. Peñalosa had, with the business we did with the electrical company, had a lot of resources, almost one year tax incomes. So we had financial results, and Peñalosa did something that I didn't do, and I feel a lot of envy. In many neighborhoods in the city, he built up big crosswalks, big paths for pedestrians. So you could see cars with a lot of difficulties because there were a lot of providential, traditional holes. We do not speak in Bogotá about road maintenance, we speak about holes. And once a journalist was saying, but what are going to do with the holes? They said, you elected me for holes here, not there. This is a beautiful library, Salmona's project. It was built by Peñalosa, and I helped it also a little bit. Well, this is the question. If you take as exercise, if you ask as an exercise to 20 theater people, one of them professional mime, to regulate traffic in the city as a mime. So we met with journalists, and the first question of a journalist was, will the mime put fines? I said, no, of course not, legally I cannot give the mime authorization to put fines. So when I said no, the journalist very sincerely, from the deepest part of his soul, said, then it will not work. And it worked. This is Ferro, the main mime. They were not very ordered. This is a in hardboard made traffic light. Okay, this is what well, we had an experience with energy saving. I will not enter in the details. So when we had a big emergency around water, tunnels that collapsed, we said, let's use the experience of electricity. Electricity is very different from water, but you can manage both with the same ideas. So the idea is, instead of cutting out water for several hours, each 24 hours, let's give people the right to use normally water, but ask them voluntarily to save water. The first week, the consumption of water get up. So I was preparing to be very harsh with Bogota's people. My team members said, let's do a survey. And what could we see in the survey? People wanted to collaborate. What if I was rough with them? I had lost. So in the survey, we asked, why do you think that some people are consuming more water? And we discovered an incredible thing. Even in the house of the water company head, people were accumulating water in vessels. So the first week consumption, extra consumption, was for the vessels. So we discovered that even in our houses, we were not understood, or we were not believed. Well, okay, so after the second or third week, it began slowly to reduce, and for 3 or 4 months, we had a reduction. But the voluntary reduction, the most impressive thing is that once the emergency finished, people didn't get back to high consumption of water. It continued to drop, and now it's less than the half that it was in 1997. So all the city's policy for building new capacity for having water changed. Chingaza 2 and in the south of Bogota, Sumapaz 1, they were intended to be built in this moment. And we have even just a sort of study, but nothing is being done to build this capacity. Why? Because we arranged to have half of the water that we projected to have at this stage. So it's a tremendous force to change culture. Water consumption is governed in part by psychology, but in part by social control. When you are taking a shower and you stay in the shower 1 hour, 2 hours, I exaggerate, of course. Well, one day I was thinking about ways of teaching people to use less water. And I was very proud of myself, I invented a very simple trick. If you take the phone and the phone is occupied, instead of the sound, of the normal sound, beep, 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 just a voice, myself at first, but some weeks later, we asked it to the singer, to the Colombian Shakira. So Shakira's voice is a lot better than mine. And Shakira was saying, thank you for saving water. Not a word more. But the strange thing that you take the telephone in your hands and you hear an unexpected voice is a tremendous change. So let's, at this moment, say what governments have to learn first from artists to make surprises. That's why the mimes cannot work a second time. Or as it happens in art, the second time mimes have to be a little bit different. Walk all the time in reverse, or like Groucho. I like a lot Groucho Marx. He turns his head 90 degrees, very. Well, and also showing things and numbers. This is very costly water, and we saw that each time you flush you use more than one of these vessels of water. So it's making people aware of common everyday things that you even do not think about. So in many families, people were discussing if they saved water under the shower or if they saved the water in the sorry? Toilet. Okay. Well, as I said, this was at a certain moment. This is the man that was directing the general manager of water company. This is myself. And we were really in a doubt. Are we making art or are we making pedagogy? Or some people say you are making both. But in those days, we had to make a physical arrangement, 20 meters in the water down. And myself, I had taken a course of swimming under the water. But in this case, the water was too obscure. So I get up, but you will not believe this engineer and myself, we were working with hard boards in wood with two words, beliefs and habits. So these were 20 meters under the water. We don't know if someday something is there, perhaps nothing, but we were speaking to the water beings. Well, one thing that we have progressed in a lot of understandings, but one main thing is it's not usual to speak with nature. And I like a lot Habermas, but the small trick that Habermas has not sufficiently developed, because for modernity it's completely unacceptable that things can hear or can speak. If we make a lot of silence, perhaps this world will speak. We will understand that it's dilatation or contraction. But some specialists always will find saying, no, nature doesn't think. No se asuste. Don't be afraid. And this was also a little bit of play, because in that moment water was very scarce. We were working for having more water for more months, protecting the city. But on the margin, on the border, we were making small sacrileges for the sake of sacred. That's a very dangerous sport. You touch sacred things. Well, I give you an example. In television, time is very costly. A journalist asked me, give me a new example of small sacrileges for the sake of the sacred. I think a little bit, and I said, we are in Cartagena, no? Do you know how less crime killed people there is last year in Cartagena? The journalist said, I do not know. They said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So he made his face, hurry up. They said 21, 22, 23, 20. 41, 42. So he was, and I said, well, that's a small sacrilege for the sake of the sacred. This is also this kind of thing. This is with water. I had, but the photo was, it's incredible. The City Hall photographer made a lot of photographies of myself. I'm grateful, but it was more interesting to make photos of the setting. Here, for example, I had 1 ton, 1,000 kilograms, 1,000 liters of water. And that's the consumption of one house in one day. So it was confronting people with making visible things that are normally not visible. So yes, in our family we use that. So with Henry we worked even today with water companies, and one of the questions is in the first meeting with the high directors of the company saying, how much water do you think that you consume when you take a shower? So even the chiefs of the chiefs have to recognize that they have no idea. And so you want to reduce the consumption of other people and you do not manage the same problem in your case. Well, we had forbidden artisanal fireworks. But at a certain moment, I wanted to have also forbidden guns. And the military said, this time no. Well, they generally were cooperating, but this time they said, we will not allow you to stop the gun circulation. So I used it as sort of legal limit resource. It was if the mayor can ask people when they go to a public spectacle to give guns for an hour or 2 hours, the time the spectacle is on. And people, when they get back out of the spectacle, they have their guns back. And so I declared all Bogota for 8 days a spectacle. Without fireworks, without guns, it is a spectacle. And it could be appreciated and judged as a spectacle. Well, in this moment, some people that work in arts world say that's exactly a performance or an installation in some sense. What this guy is doing is art. In my case, I had no time to think it's art or not art. Sometimes things were very horrible. Some of the drawings. This is Bogota as a spectacle. This is also part of the spectacle. This is the main plaza. This is every Sunday or every festivity sport. People go in, well, this idea was originally New York. So it began in New York, but it acquired an unusual scale in Bogota. So it says estimated that at least 1 million of people get out on the streets each weekend. This is a little bit more simple. This group of disguised artists were going to places where there was a lot of noise. And their slogan was, the end of the noise is close. And they had a shh. So instead of fining or so on, we had artists controlling and educating common people. Let's a little bit of theory. This was not my work to explain to the city the theory, but to apply it. Well, the fines are not all the thing. You have fear of legal sanction, of course, jail, fines, that works. But also you have fear of guilt. And also you have fear of social rejection. You have shame. So it's a very strange thing. A city mayor's reading for hours literature about shame and guilt. The difference, the complementarity, how shame is more humiliating, how if you shame someone, that person can say, it's the last time I accept a signal for you. You will not shame me a second time. So if you shame someone, you have to reconciliate with him to show a sort of path to reconstruction, rebuilding social harmony. But we have not only punishments, we have positive rewards. And social recognition is a very important thing. Once you get social recognition, you are captured by it. It's incredible. Well, if I had to lose the trust of my society in myself, it would be a lot more hurting than being punished by jail or by fines. Well, fines also work. Well, this is a motif for many discussions with philosophers. Kant school philosophers do not like that idea that you self-reward by a positive flush when you act well. You have to act well with total disinterest. Myself, I am a little bit hedonist, so I like, well, not much time. We have to stop quickly, but a little bit of self-gratification is healthy. And we have also admiration for the law. When I was in secondary school, one of my schoolmates was put out of the school because she was pregnant. Now in Colombia, not any school can use legal or informal procedures to put out a girl that is pregnant. Well, that's not for celebrate pregnancy, but the schools have to help to control pregnancy without putting in risk the right to be educated. So when in the same school where one was excluded, I was invited to make my speech with them, and there was a girl of 17 or 18 years walking with his daughter of 3 years. Wow. Well, I don't know if, sorry, I get excited. Well, now I will make a question. It's a sort of very important for us information. What do you obey the most between these 6 groups of regulatory systems or subsystems? The admiration for the law, the fear of legal sanction, moral self-gratification, fear of guilt, social recognition, fear of social guilt. I will not ask you to hide your face or to not look what is the answer of the others. So that please try to make your own conviction. So what of these 6 mechanisms are you driven mostly, or the most? So I will ask in order. Who obeys the most to admiration of the law? Having 6 choices, who says that this is the most strongest, the strongest mechanisms? No, nobody? Nobody, and some laughs are also an indicator of fear of legal sanction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is not the way we do the surveys. Moral self-gratification. Wow, there are a lot of Latin Americans here. But also in American auditories. Fear of guilt. Social recognition. Good. Fear of social rejection. Aha. That's a little bit different as in Latin America. Okay. Now, let's ask the same question, but about other people. Common citizens in New York, what they do obey the most. Okay? So think a little bit about it. A New Yorker obeys the most to one of the 6. Who think that it's admiration for the law? Who thinks that the New Yorker is governed mainly by fear of legal sanction? Photos? We are in a sort of Latin American enclave. Okay. Coming to New York too. I'm grateful you are here, but sampling could be different. Okay, well, no, with North American auditories, there are more people here. Sorry. People that recognize that they, well, summarizing in Latin America, what we have. We are moral subjects that obey the most to positive rewards. But we think that others are people that are legal subjects and that obey to the fear of sanctions. So, carrots for me, sticks for you. Okay. Well, the exercise is not as important as it seems about what is strongest. Well, the main thing is that a big part of our behavior is obtained by the 6 mechanisms working together, or 3 or 4 of them working together. We have multi-motivation, we have multi-regulation. And the big problem in countries like Colombia is to get harmony between the 3 systems. Because if your consciousness says, do not kill, but the social setting, the people around say, you allow this man get in bed with your wife, and you will leave him alive, you have to do something. You are not a true macho if you do not engage in some kind of destructive behavior. So, oh, it's incredible. The machismo is a lot, it's like Woody Allen, but multiplied. So Woody Allen says, now kiss her. The machismo is 100 of machos, kiss her, kiss her. She's desirable. So the authentic desire of one man is replaced by the desire of 100 of men. But I promise to my wife not speaking. Well, this is just language, sort of convention. So it's very important that, well, the day in Colombia that shame, guilt, and fear of jail pushed in the way of not killing people, and positive rewards, intrapsychic, social, and even legal. If the 6 work in the same direction of not killing, we will not kill. Well, we will have perhaps people that get completely psychotic, like it happens sometimes in the United States, that get on the roof of bah, bah, bah. But it's a very border problem. The social legitimation, moral or cultural, by both paths, justification of corruption or violence is the main problem. We have in generally good laws, but we have not harmony between the laws and the moral convictions and the social attitudes. Well, I could not make this discourse to the population, imagine. I said, Mayor, go to hell. Get back to the university. So we used some things very visual. And it's very strange that we have perceived the importance of visual things at the end. I have said, in some cases, we have no photographs. And we were not aware how much of our message was through visual things. So we had a citizen's card. We distributed about 1 million of cards, and the card was to the behavior. So we didn't declare bad citizens, or we didn't construct a sort of a stigma. We didn't stigmatize, but we had a sort of, if you act badly, I punish immediately. Well, one of the interesting things that is, if I say something, we can get in a escalation in words. If we fight, we can get in an escalation. With the red card, it's ridiculous. Red card for you, show me. So, well, my secretary was saying, Antanas, the day when someone will be killed because he had shown the red citizen's card, that day, your ideas get out of the scenario. And it was interesting. I have been asking a lot of people if there was not aggression. There were two answers. A businessman that's saying, I never had felt so much shame as the day the mime corrected me. And there was another example. Well, sorry I didn't show, I had to show this first. Yes. Well, Reddit was a little bit more aggressive. I remember. Someone spew. Well, I will not spew here. But was the biggest aggression, and well, so we managed to contain the social mutual control in a box. We didn't have big problems of violence around it. Some people carried it in the car, some people used it, and now people use just bare hand. This was mimes, fear of guilt. If every place where there was, in the 5 last years, accidents with pedestrians, we draw a black star. It was about 1 meter, 20 centimeters. Well, we also had better jail. We also had songs, for example, children singing your skin, not touch it. Very good thing for, no. Your consciousness can be well-feeling because our skin is complete. So we use the 6 like in a piano. You have not the obligation to touch all of the keys, but sometimes you use the 6, but sometimes you use only part. Viktor Shklovsky is a theoretician of art, the Russian formalism. That's an idea that comes from Kant, critic of judgment, to Hannah Arendt and to Doris Sommer. And it's a very simple thing. You cannot say between tastes there is no conflict. Entre gustos no hay disgustos. It's not acceptable. Once you see the mimes, you have to make a judgment. Your judgment can be, I do not like it, it's not understandable, it's unjust, etc. This is a more interesting, perhaps, feature of art. Art does not only celebrate things like they are. Art also suggests that things could be very different. And that is very important for building of institutions, but also for culture. This is part of a work with Doris Sommer, by far the English-speaking academy that has had the most of influence in the divulging, in the understanding of our work. This is people killed in traffic accidents. We also fired out the corrupted traffic police. There was better pre-hospital care, and there were the stars. This is homicide rates in Colombia. So one of the amazing things is what happened here, what happened here where we had the levels of the world in violence. So we are not biologically violent. We are not even culturally violent people, because we could manage for almost 20 years to live rather peaceful. We have also other results in tax revenues. This is the approval, the social approval of carrying guns. This is justifications. That's part of the more recent work is on that. Some people justify some behavior without making that behavior, without incurring in that behavior. Well, these are examples. Well, I promised the 2 times I was elected more taxes. The second term, the city council members said, you promised more taxes, we not. We even promised to do not allow you to raise taxes. So we were in a difficult situation, so we used a previous experience in university to ask people to pay voluntary taxes, 10%. And 63,000 families paid 10% more taxes. So if the council would not have changed its opinion, well, we had thousands of people marching, asking more taxes. So it was politically very risky for the city council, so they approved the taxes. What was, well, this was not exactly like that, but schematically, families and workplaces work rather well. But when you go to a place where unknown people meet each other, in the macho culture, for example, it's almost obligatory to say things to girls that are not good. You don't imagine how big is that social pressure. Have you made, when you are 16 or 17 old, people, are you sexually initiated? If you are not, you risk that in the next party, someone closes the door and invites people that are in the room. Well, it's very oppressive for the macho. Well, this is also important. We are not fundamentalists. We do not want structured people thinking in a single way. We want pluralism. We think that it's part of the richness. This is perhaps the best summing up of Cultura Ciudadana expressed through objectives. Voluntary compliance with norms, citizens peacefully making others comply norms, peaceful resolution of conflicts, and this is very important, communication. Both sides, expression and interpretation. And we try to reconfigure totally all our work in arts, in sport, in culture, as bettering communication between people. So they were asking, why do you help arts? I said, I have more than the double of the resources of the money for art, but not, well, a part art for the art, but a big part for useful art. Well, for not having complicated discussions, we decided to call what we do sub-art. Sub-art is art without the pretension of being art. It's a little bit logically strange, but it helps to stop certain discussions. It's sub-art. Well, I'm very close to Habermas' approach, and well, one of the things that Habermas does not solve one intuition about art is when communication is interrupted and you reconnect. So you are irritated because you don't understand what about is this, and suddenly so that game, that playing with communication is very pleasant thing. This is art is epics in post-war times. Ties. That's don't interpret. Okay. This is a little bit provocative. Well, citizens normally participate in the government of the city through strategic plan, to more tactic planning of smaller decisions. You have participatory budgeting. All these are classical, and we did a lot in that direction. But the amazing thing, public debate is also classical. But this is the thing, the new thing that we found. Citizens can cooperate by involving very directly in social regulation. It's not bargaining. It's not planning around the table with small faculties. It's what I do if you begin with your car to drive in a way that it's not sufficiently prudent. Sorry, my English. Okay, I'm without. That's a little bit costly. Perhaps you have to learn on your own skin. Well, this is taken from John Elser. John Elser is professor here in Columbia University. Imagine there are rivalities. Well, I go through it very quickly. But this is part of the common, well, urbanists are also people that behave working on the behavior of the people. If an urbanist has to put a fence, it's a sort of bankruptcy. A good urbanist arranges with colors and with textures the path, and people follow that path without feeling any pressure. So pedagogy and architecture and urbanism have a lot of things together. Well, this is the most amazing conclusion that I have found. Rules, this kind of legal rules, psychological norms, social norms, working on our emotions. It's the single most important thing that I have learned. There is not just law, or just culture, or just individual's moral. There are three impunities, not one. There are positive mechanisms. We accept that a lot of people take decisions for us, looking to us as economical subjects. And we are economical subjects many hours in the day. But I cannot imagine a single human being that does not make some decisions or play for a short time at least, not as economic subject. This is publicity. So I would like to be professor here for 2 months in September and October. It's in Harvard they called it shopping. So people the first week they go to the first conference of each professor and they choose. So in some sense, once again, I am in your hands. Thank you very much. Yes.
Can I go ahead and ask? Okay. Hi, thank you for that fantastic presentation. 2 questions. One is, in terms of your connections between citizenship and art and your conclusions, one thing that I was struck by is how often what emerged as central to me in your experiment and experience is how challenging patriarchy was absolutely central to your politics. You said a lot of times challenging machismo, being macho is very difficult, so much pressure that it poses. So you were very consciously challenging that culture, and yet in your presentation, it was about art and citizenship and communicative action. Why don't you put it there, gender and patriarchy, as a key way in which you are challenging emotions? That was a curiosity.
Yes, things have some rhythm. In my second term, the majority of my team were women, but of course that's not equivalent to gender perspective. There were only 2.5, well, strange, 2 or 3 women that were feminists and that were very militant. So sometimes you had the majority of women saying, "You are exaggerating." I remember I lost a discussion with them. It was very simple. We were writing the plan, and one of the sentences that were included by pressure of these 2.5 women, well, I say that to underline that they were a small minority, but they said, put all the statistics that the city will collect should distinguish by gender difference. So I said, no, but in the transport system, perhaps this is not relevant. I said, how, Mr. Mayor? Don't you think that if 70% of people got in Transmilenio are machos, it's different that if there is 1 for 1? So I lost the discussion and I had to sign. I think every statistics that we will build will collect information about gender. That's one question. I ask you to ask only one question at a time because I open one folder and they get embarrassed to answer normally the first question. Or perhaps there was only one question.
Hi, thank you for this amazing talk. I have a question. You briefly mentioned pedagogy, and I was really struck by that. And so I wanted to hear a bit more. So I just wanted to ask what to you is pedagogy and why it is so important in governing a city. Thank you.
Yes. Well, at 20 years old, I wanted to more or less to bite the word. And in that moment, an American-based perspective on education was instructional design. When the defense ministry or the developers of new war planes were designing and building the plane, they had to prepare the pilots, because it would be absurd to have an X-15 without a pilot, or people running, let's train you. So when the plane is beginning to be constructed, there is a complete inventory of all the situations and what to do in every of the situations, but to extreme detail. You cannot let the pilot will invent what to do. There is no room for invention when you drive an aircraft war. So I was against that. I felt myself as an artisanal. I thought that teaching is typically artisanal. If someone talks to you about industrialization of teaching, be aware. And in a certain moment, we discovered that two technocrats of Colombia had made an arrangement with Tallahassee University in Florida for transferring the methodology of instructional design to Colombia. And I was working on this, taking books from the United States, but suddenly I made a conference and the teacher said, but that's what you said they are just doing at this moment. So we had instructional design, we had 8,000 pages for the primary school. Every activity was described, the way of evaluating each learning was described, like in the plain story. This was called by some pedagogy people, the experts, teacher-proof curricula. So you have a disaster of teacher, but if you have good design, it can work. So I fought on that with the Federici group. We wrote a small article in public university newspaper. It's the only article that is about 3 or 4 pages that I know with 10 authors. But we wanted to express our conviction that that was not a good way. So for some months and some years, we were in public debate with the experts of the ministry. One of the proudness motive was, it was in mathematics in National University that were the best defensor of the reform and the best 2 or 3 people that were attacking that reform. Well, the teacher said, okay, we accept that educating is not instrumental action. It's not even strategical action. But what the hell is teaching? So we said, let's be a little bit empiricist. We, teachers, we communicate, verbally communicate. We have something in groups. We do not make too much teaching with individuals. And in that moment, Habermas had published What is Universal Pragmatics. So we took Habermas as a sort of saving table, and we began to think about the specificities. But the most important thing I have understood in pedagogy is if someone wants to disconnect, he can disconnect. Here, almost all the people have been very attentive, but perhaps someone has been thinking about his girlfriend, or I cannot do nothing to that. Well, I can do better my own presentation, but so it was in a moment where I understood that communication is strongly related with freedom. People are free. When I get back to United States to understand why you have not teacher-proof curricula here, it was because of Dewey. So very early in 19th century, there was Taylorism, and there were some people working to apply Taylorism to education. But the idea that democracy is something to what you have to be prepared by discussion, by argumentation, by even sometimes by voting. So Dewey was the protection. So, and the other thing is decentralization. Colombia was chosen as a good country for making teacher-proof curricula because the educational system is very centralized. Not the private high-class schools, but the public school is very, it has a very unitary structure. So, well, after that we had some thoughts, and well, legally, politically, the union of the teachers won. And we can say that we helped it to that victory a little bit. Yes. So pedagogy for me, well, we read a little bit the classicals of pedagogy, Comenius, this beautiful idea, the art of teach anything to anyone. Sorry.
Hi, thank you. I really enjoyed your speech. This is what participatory democracy is, particularly what I'm interested in. And I would like to dwell a little bit in your point about the need to speak the same language between, like that the government and the citizens have to speak the same language in order to communicate. And I was wondering whether by this you meant that the government has to adapt the language of the people, of the social group it's trying to reach, or that there has to be there should be some kind of educational incentive of encouraging people to be educated, I guess, in the government practice. Or is there, or art, when you were referring to art, would serve as a common language in this sense?
Okay, very clear. We make transactions. Bogotá is divided in 20 localities. More than a third of the new budget is used by the localities, and the localities do participative planning. And we were making incentives to those localities who were taking priorities different from Cultura Ciudadana. It was a strange thing. Instead of giving a premium, a gift, a reward for having the same priorities as central government, they were rewarded for having their own priorities, but having and using the same language. It was a sort of despotic arrangement. You will take money where you want, but we will speak the same language. Examples. People want to put in good state roads. Sometimes a little fragment that does not connect in either border. So we said, are you wanting this asphalt for having some public space, or do you want for transporting? If it's for transporting, it has to connect somewhere. And so you have to choose between the two objectives: better transportation, more productivity of the city, or public space. Another example, some community members asked money for motorcycles for police. And there was not a part of security in the planning process. So people were asked to choose between Cultura Ciudadana and institutional legitimacy. So we want motors. Please say to what of the objectives it is related. If it is for better respect of law and rules, this will be in Cultura Ciudadana. But if it's to have a police that respects human rights of the people, that will be in legitimación institucional. But we will not have security for the sake of security. And that was a very strong, strange commitment. It was, let's look security as a mean for having credible institutions, or a mean or part of the instruments for having Cultura Ciudadana. But the most impressive experience about common language happened in Ciudad Bolívar. It's a poor neighborhood, and we had a lot of lights. We were in a big installation, and people were crying, Cabildo Popular, Cabildo Popular. And I was asking them to accept that this meeting was just for coordinating projects that have been financed. So there was no new money in discussion. But they insisted, so it was sort of difficult, struggling for the direction. So I said, we can program a Cabildo Popular in 20 years, in 20 years, in 20, what would say Freud? Well, it's clear that I was not very enthusiastic with the Cabildo Popular because it's a methodology where people ask a lot of things and government can say no to several things, but it's, in short sense, it makes sabotage to the planning process. Well, this is at least my justification. So at a certain moment, well, there were a lot of lights because we were transmitting with local television to the community. An old man, a very old man, had sperma, a candle, a candle with light. So when he came close to me, people began to applaud, and I was looking at him, and well, I have no choice. I have to give him the micro, and he says, "Mr. Mayor, do you know from where will come the light?" So an old man, candle, I did like that. And that moment he said, "No, sir, from the Cabildo Popular." Wow, wow. All the big group was shouting, very happy. And I was trying to get words to take the candle, but I didn't find words, and I felt that I was being won with sort of my language used well against me. So I didn't find any, well, I continued the meeting, and we took the decisions that had to be taken. There was a woman that was coordinating several plans that were financed. But I got to my house feeling very badly. I had been beaten in my expertise space. So I turned it, I couldn't sleep. About 3:30 the morning, I said, perhaps this community has acquired a new struggle way. And I could sleep happy. That community had learned to claim for its aspirations in a new way. That's using the language as it can be very useful at very different levels. So, if there is strong conflicts, grasp to the law, grasp to respectful communication. That's all.